what happens when Joe finds out. Since it was Friday and I had just had my Volvo serviced, I decided to have the service technician drive me home rather than back to the office. He returned it to me on the way home. It was a warm spring afternoon, and I had some yard work awaiting me at home, which influenced my decision. We have a large backyard, and I was on the back edge of the property raking leaves when I saw my brother's red Corvette pull up into our driveway. Great, I thought. The only time he comes here is to borrow something he rarely returns. As I approached the driveway, I heard my son Sam yell, "Hey, Dad, what brings you to the land of the weak?" Dad, why did my son call my brother Dad? And why is this a country of weaklings? My brother replied, I'm returning Uncle Joe's circular saw. I accidentally cut the electrical cord. He needs it fixed so I can finish my project at home. Is Clueless Joe here? Clueless Joe? My name is Joe, and I hardly consider myself ignorant. Maybe me. Should I just stay outside the garage and listen to this offensive conversation? Of course, I turned on my cell phone to record the conversation. Sam blurted out, Clueless's car isn't here. He rarely comes home before 5, and I still try not to spend much time with him. So no, I don't think he's home. Let's say now that school is out, when I can spend some time at your place, it's a lot more fun than being here. I would really like you to come and stay, but your mother wants to spend as much time with you as possible. You're her only child, and when you're gone, she'll be lonely. Let her relax a little about this. She was supposed to spend some time with me on Thursday afternoon, so I could ask her if you would stay with me for a week or two this summer. It was scary to hear my son ask, why doesn't Mom divorce Bistolkovi and move in with you? I didn't know that she regularly spent her days at his house. Oh no, things that I didn't like at all began to coincide. Maybe I'm not aware. My thoughts about what was happening weighed on me. Eric boasted, ever since I got her pregnant, I've been asking her about it every month. She says, no, you're a great asshole, but you'll be a lousy husband. I have a husband whom I truly love and cherish. Every moment spent with him makes me feel like the happiest woman in the world. Of course, my sex with you is amazing, but it makes me feel loved, and I definitely don't love you. This is my son, so she won't divorce Joe Tyndall, but she will have Eric Tyndall from time to time. I have to go, but I'll see you tomorrow at noon at your grandparents' annual family birthday party. At this point, my legs turned to spaghetti as I slid down the garage wall into Hosta's garden. My world was destroyed. My son, who was not my biological son, was in pain. My wife getting pregnant by my brother and then having sex with him regularly was mind-blowing. Somehow I returned to where I was working and sat on the rope swing. The swing where I spent many hours pushing my son for joy. I sat on this swing and cried until there was a huge puddle of mud under my feet. What could I do? Before I did anything, I needed to assess the entire situation. Then I thought of my redemption, DNA test. A few years ago, Carol, Sam, and I took a DNA test. How could this be wrong? But what if Carol throws out my test and puts Eric's saliva in a tube with my name on it? This will hide Sam's true origins. What a disgusting act. They threw away my legacy and replaced it with this asshole, deliberately denying my right to know that I was not the father of the boy I so desperately loved. With this thought of redemption ignored, I needed to take stock of my current world. My name is Joe Tyndall, and I'm 43 years old. I don't weigh much more now than I did in college, 175 pounds. I'm slim and wasn't an athlete in high school or college. My major was track, and I excelled on the school track team. Now the long-distance running I used to enjoy is interrupted by family and work responsibilities. But I still run a few miles every week, sometimes participating in a 5K or 10K run for charity. My job is the dual role of Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Tyndall's Machine Company in my hometown. My great-grandfather started out as a blacksmith, sharpening plows and putting iron rings on wooden cart wheels. Grandfather Tyndall and my father Edward followed suit, each adding to the business the latest metalworking equipment of their day. We now produce precision parts for the aerospace and metal parts industries. My father, Edward, is the president, and my brother, Eric, is the marketing director of a company that employs 50 people. Dad did not go to college, but did attend the best trade school available at the time. I have a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering and accounting, which makes me a CFO and coup. Eric's younger brother's physical makeup was the complete opposite of mine. He is 6 feet 3 inches tall. He is 5 inches taller than me and over 50 pounds heavier. He was the consummate athlete, big, loud, arrogant, and a real bully. He was a crowd favorite as a running back in high school football. A small college scholarship allowed him to attend school while I had to work and get school loans. The only reason he graduated from college was because the coaches kept passing him over to keep him eligible for football. Eric's degree in physical education was of no use to him or any other employer, so he began working at Tyndall as a junior mechanic. Much of our work requires precision, and this is not his set. Instead, he used his name recognition to open doors to new and existing customers. He couldn't discuss the intricacies of our business, but he had a remarkable ability to lie to keep clients happy. Don't get me wrong, he was good at his job and a great asset to the company. Like any multi-generational company, we had our disagreements. An example would be when Eric wanted to earn a commission on new sales. It wasn't outside the industry, but he was already making a good salary, the same as me. I used this time to demand that I keep all the proceeds from the patents I filed. Edward gave in easily to Eric, but I had to really fight him to get my money. My wife Carol met me because of her exceptional ass. She wore loose shorts and a t-shirt to a charity 5K run for her school library. I graduated from college and worked with my dad. I've seen my share of uncovered female gluteus maximus muscles during and after college, but this one was special. Rear view, narrow waist, flowing into 2 muscular buttocks of perfect size. I hadn't even seen her face yet, but it seemed to me that I was in love. It's still temporary. With my running time, I could have stood in front of her, but I preferred this starting position. When the starting pistol went off, I followed. There were weirdo perverts who would get between me and her to enjoy the view. By the end of the first kilometer, I was her only fan on the track. I figured her front was just as good as her back, as I noticed passers-by watched her shirt bounce up and down with every step. One of the runners in front of her dropped a water bottle, and she tried to get around it and began to stumble. I quickly walked over to grab her arm and stabilize her. She grinned and said, "Thank you, I really didn't want to fall on that concrete street. I'm Carol." "Hi, Carol, I'm Joe. Can I run with you? Just to save you from falling." She smiled at my request and said, "Of course." This was the beginning of our relationship. Carol had a secondary education degree and worked as an English teacher. A year after we met while running, we were married at Carol's home church. After 2 blissful years of marriage, we decided to start a family. Despite repeated lustful evenings and weekends, Carol did not become pregnant. Diets were varied, sexual intercourse was attempted in different positions, and a thermometer was always at hand to determine the exact time of fertilization. We both relaxed and returned to sex out of love for him and each other. Just a couple of months later, Carol lost her period, but she didn't want to jinx it by telling anyone, including me. When she missed the second one, I was delighted. I was raised to believe that family is one of the most important factors in a person's life. The Tyndall family lived in this community for over 100 years. Generational photographs of our parents' home reflected our pride in our family. The pregnancy was not without its difficulties, as Carol was bedridden for the last 2 months under doctor's orders. The birth was difficult, and we almost lost our wife and newborn son that day. During the surgical process, he noticed a situation due to which he warned us not to try to get pregnant again for fear of serious consequences. He stressed that another pregnancy could lead to the death of both mother and child, which none of us wanted, so we agreed to the surgery he recommended. Knowing this was for us, not having kids made Sam special to us. Sam was an energetic boy, constantly active. He and I enjoyed living in rough living quarters on the floor, much to Carol's dismay. The hours of throwing, kicking, and tossing some kind of ball were countless. His grades were not outstanding, but slightly higher than the average boy his age. It was after his 15th birthday that things started to deteriorate between us. I attributed this to the usual conflict between parent and child at this age. We used to talk for hours, passing the ball back and forth, but he said he was busy right now. Too busy with his cell phone and Game Boy to talk to his dad. When any form of contact was demanded of him, he became sullen and disrespectful. From what I have collected, he seems to have believed that the accounting profession was less masculine than other professions. Part of the idea probably came from the fact that he was now taller and more muscular than me. Over the years, Carol continued to be the perfect wife in every way. Because of her knowledge, intelligence, and complete dedication to her calling, she was now the principal of McKinley School, a school that was designed to give special attention to students who had difficulty doing schoolwork and had problems interacting with others, such as fighting. I noticed that the stress of supervising unruly students led to some conflict at home. According to her definition of the task, she made snarky comments about what I did or didn't do. Her irritation with me rarely extended into bedtime. She was always sweet and loving when we crawled under the covers. There was no part of our sex life that I considered inappropriate or not frequent enough. So I was stunned when I heard my brother tell Sam that he was Sam's father and that he had been having sex with Carol regularly for over 17 years. No way, I thought. But what did I really know for sure? The biggest doubt for me was that Sam had the same body type as Eric and Edward. I am a strange person in terms of genetic similarity. Something was wrong, either in my head or in my stomach, as I considered the possibilities. That evening, I watched Carol like a hawk watches a mouse. There were absolutely no obvious signs that she was having an affair. Dinner was fun and enjoyable. Sam left to pick up his friends in his car and watch a movie, or whatever they do, until 11 p.m. With Sam gone until 11 p.m., Carol and I began cleaning the kitchen. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom. When I turned around, she was wearing only a lace apron. She acted like nothing was out of the ordinary and told me, "Hurry up. Get to work. I have plans for you tonight." We laughed and played, touching each other, until the kitchen was clean. I then went to bed, where I was treated to some of the best sex I've ever had. I watched her up close, and she was full of enthusiasm and very responsive to my every touch. Not a single hint of the pretense of her burning desires. After sex, we hugged and expressed our undying love for each other. The next morning, Saturday, we were to have lunch at my parents' house in honor of Edward's 70th birthday. Carol didn't like driving my Volvo, and Sam wanted to go alone so he could leave early. We did what Carol wanted. We all went into her Lexus. As we walked through the front door, my mother, Sally, began hugging us. Carol, Sam, then me. Same order for Edward. Next, I looked for interactions between Eric and Carol. Eric hugged Sam happily and then extended his arms for Carol to hug. A hug that was enthusiastic on Eric's part, but lifeless on Carol's. In fact, I thought I saw a look of boredom and annoyance on her face as he rubbed against her. This was not the reaction I expected from lovers who had been having sex for 17 years. To me, I received a handshake and a punch to the chest from Eric. He happily slammed his 46-inch chest into my 36-inch testosterone level comparison form chest. I thought about testing the skills of a possible romance and disagreement between my parents. Don't be nosy, but be more like the bumbling Inspector Klaus-O from the famous Pink Panther. Maybe rattle some rocks and see if the snake comes out. During a lull in conversation, I cast the first line. "Eric, I need to talk to our CPA on Thursday afternoon. Will you be in the office to cover for me?" I said that, knowing that he did not understand accounting processes and would not be able to help anyone who called me. "No, Joe, I won't be in the office either. There's a big project in the works." Carol blew a couple of bubbles in her iced tea with her nose. "This means I'm getting closer to figuring something out." "Well, big guy, will this make you sweaty and tired?" No, I've worked with this man many times and always come out on top. The look Carol gave him was hotter than any of our plasma cutters. I saw the color drain from her face. No one made any noise. No fork on a plate, no clinking ice in the tea. Midnight in the cemetery was deafening compared to my mother's dining room. All 5 eyes rolled. This was also a clue that they all knew about the betrayal. I thought I could hear sweat seeping through their skin. This is exactly what I wanted. Be clueless Joe to all 5 of us. But underneath that clumsiness, I knew what was going on. Dad broke the ice by saying, "Well, guys, take out the calendars and see who's going where." He continued, "I'm glad you guys came to my birthday today. My grandfather bought this 160-acre property when it was a few miles outside of town. He would be proud that the land is still in the family and our family business is thriving under Eric and Joe's leadership. As a result of my confidence in you boys and my advanced age, I intend to resign as president of Tyndall. Eric will become the new president. Changes in the salary structure will always be 75% of Eric's income. I really want Joe to stay with the company and be rewarded for his good work. Considering Joe's income from patents, both of you boys will have about the same income." Carol squeezed my hand and smiled warmly. "So, will I respond directly to Eric? Eric, who doesn't know the difference between a CNC machine and a popcorn maker, will run the company. This is a recipe for the worst kind of disaster. Listen, little brother, I was always the guy who took charge while you were the bean counter. It takes an alpha male to be a boss, not a weakling like you. Get over it, Joe. Once again, I win, you lose." "That's enough, boys. Eric, you won't be the boss. I am still the chairman of the board and outrank you. I own all the shares. You will run the business as I tell you. This company has been in the family for over 100 years, and I won't let it blow up before my eyes. We belong to Tyndall, and an important family legacy is in our hands, just like the men on the wall. So cool your jets." Dad pointed for effect to photographs on the living room wall of 3 generations of Tyndall men. "By the way, which photo on the wall is your grandfather?" "My grandfather is in the photos on the left. My father is next to him, and I am at the far end. I thought you knew that." "I just confirmed it because I have a question. Looking at the 3 photographs, it seems that I do not resemble any Tyndall, living or dead. Different body style, hair color, or facial expression. Eric and Sam are like Tyndall, but not me. I don't understand this." My mother's shoulders tightened. Her face turned gray as quickly as Dad's turned red. Once again, there was silence as my parents' and Eric's eyes swiveled. I found that the best way to get people to open up is to drop a poop in their lap, then shut up and let them carefully remove it without getting too much crap on their hands. "Joe, you might finally know the family secret. Your mother and I were planning to get married, and your mother got drunk at a bachelorette party and got pregnant. She and I also had sex, so she thought she got pregnant from me. She had no way of knowing. We got married before she found out she was pregnant. We were both surprised but happy because I thought I was the father. You were a weak and short child. We thought it was because your mother was having problems with her pregnancy. You were a sickly child, and we almost lost you when you had mumps. For several weeks, it was somehow unnoticeable. Joe, you were about 10 years old when we realized you were not my biological son. Sally hid the fact that she had sex with someone else before we got married. She said you look a lot like this other guy. DNA tests became available. We checked and confirmed that you are not my biological son, but Eric was. Well, that answered some questions about how I was treated compared to Eric. This was not the bomb I expected. I was looking for information about Sam's biological father and got slapped. It turned me upside down. There wasn't much I could do about it now, but now I had more questions. Mom finally spoke up and said, "That doesn't mean we don't love you as much as Erica. We raised you as our son, and we both still consider you our son." It was nice to hear her say that, but what does that have to do with what I heard from Sam and Eric? "Okay, Dad, that explains my body type." "Why is Sam not my body type and not the same as you and Eric. There's another poop for them. Joe, you and Carol tried so hard to have a baby that it became stressful for Carol. She thought she had failed you and came to ask your mother for advice. She remembered that you had a bad case of mumps and were probably sterile. Your mother and I have come to the conclusion that for your marriage and the Tyndall legacy, we need Eric to impregnate Carol. Carol was reluctant at first, but realized that everyone in the family would benefit from the birth of Tyndall's new child. Including you, Joe, you wanted a family, and Eric and Carol provided you with what you could not create. We hoped it wouldn't be discovered. But thanks to DNA tests and genetic differences between Tyndall and non-Tyndall body shapes, it is inevitable. My mind was overwhelmed with a storm of emotions. Emotions that swirled through my head like a tornado. There are no words. I could not comprehend this fateful discovery. I was surrounded by both my mother and my wife, holding me tenderly and tenderly. They both had tears in their eyes, knowing the pain and confusion I was experiencing. The mother whispered, my son, I'm so proud of you." Carol whispered, my husband, I love you so much." Dad said, "We hope, Joe, that you won't be offended by this, but will enjoy the love your family has for you." "Gee, Edward, oh, can I call you Edward now that I know you're not my father? Why do you think I don't mind being humiliated by my entire family?" Sam growled, "Now you know how humiliated I was. The kids think you're my father and not a real man like Eric. Damn it." Everyone turned their attention to the impudent Sam. After punching him in the face, Carol shouted, "Joe was the best father in the world to you. He spared nothing to make you happy. I saw 1,000 children whose father was worse than him, but none was better than him. You should count your lucky stars that he raised you." I said sarcastically, "Why did it take you so long to tell me that you cared so generously for my feelings? Why not pick the scab off the wound now, instead of lying to me all these years? I bet you had a good laugh behind my back when I was bragging about how great my son is. Instead, you called me Clueless Joe." And again, the center of the universe is silent. "We couldn't tell you that, Joe. It would be too painful for you, and we hoped no one would find out. Besides, we needed you at the factory. You are the brains and ingenuity of the entire operation. I'll be lost if you get upset and leave. Besides, we couldn't afford to pay anyone as well as you. We had a recruiter give us a range of salaries for CFO and coup, and he said it was more than double what we were paying. It's too much for me to understand. You encouraged my brother to marry my wife to Tyndall's child, not mine. You forced me to work at lower rates just to make your profits and dividends better. You've got me thinking that I'll run the show someday, but Tyndall's blood is more important than competence. I can't believe what you brought upon me today. Next thing I know, you'll be telling me that my precious wife is still sleeping with that asshole of a brother." Now comes the big reveal. Will she tell me or not whether she still has sex with Eric? Maybe she'll just lie like she's done for the last 17 years. Again, there was no noise in the room. Eyes rolled between the accomplices, but no one denied the mortal sin. The meek voice finally moaned, "I'm so sorry, Joe. I'm really sorry, but you have to understand the stress I experience in my job. I don't love him. I hate him for who he is. However, I need him to keep me from going crazy." With these words, she collapsed to the floor. My left leg started to move towards her to calm her down, but the rest of my body said stop. She herself is to blame for this. Now she has to deal with the consequences. I feel sorry for this son, but Son, you're a damn hypocrite. You call me son after you destroyed my entire existence. You give me the least amount of affection compared to Eric when we were kids, encouraging my wife to cuckold me by putting forward Eric's bastard as mine, all the while laughing at my complete ignorance of the absolute and total disrespect you have for me. I'm done with this den of snakes. By saying you were doing this for me, you were intentionally and literally having me for your own personal reasons. None of these reasons were good for me. They were all heartbreaking for me. I'm like a newborn orphan, an abandoned child who has absolutely no one to come to his aid. With this tirade so loud that drool began to flow from my mouth, I turned to leave. As I approached the door, a large paw grabbed my arm. "I'm sorry, Joe. Since it means so much to you, I will stop sleeping with your wife." The sheer audacity of this consummate jerk. "Give me back my exhausted wife." I turned towards the door again, but this time Eric turned me around. The spinning motion had amazing value for me because I had the ability to hit him as I turned. I aimed at his nose and swung as hard as I could. The problem was that I missed. I didn't realize how much taller he was up close. Instead, my fist hit him straight in the throat. Even though my punch didn't come close to his nose, his dark brown eyes certainly bulged out of their sockets. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat, looking but seeing nothing. Carol and Sam rushed towards him, but with different emotions. Sam tried to console his mother's breeder. Sam turned to me and shouted, "You're a bastard. You're a fucking bastard." Ha, what hypocrisy this is. One bastard calls another bastard a bastard. What a crap sewer you have here, Ed and Sally. Damn mess. Carol began kicking Eric in the back as hard as she could, screaming, "You're an asshole. You deserve this and thousands more." I left the mini riot, got into Carol's car, and proceeded to drive Eric's precious Corvette. As I pulled out of the yard, I hit the passenger side of Edward's new F-150 pickup. As a result of my suffering and humiliation, all I could do was keep the car on the road. The abandoned gas station gave me a chance to take a break from the turmoil. At first I cried until I thought I was dehydrating myself. Then the anger exploded like 4th of July fireworks. Beating a vinyl dash is the most I've been able to do in my state. Finally, fatigue took over. My limbs became weak and my mind went numb. The buzzing of a cell phone coming from the floor was one of many calls and messages that the bitch, my ex-wife Carol, was trying to make. Taking a deep breath, I thought, what should I do now? They had no way of exposing what they had done. I was not only a cuckold, but also a real bastard, since my mother was not married to my biological father. Well, isn't this a real shitstorm that I'm in? 3 days ago, I was the king of the world. Now it's a world of shit. The only good thing I could think of was that I had options. I could continue to be clueless Joe and get a raise, but I would have to report to Eric or Edward as my boss. Every day I saw Eric and Carol gave me the same pain in my stomach that I felt today. This shouldn't have happened because they both ruined my life. There is no option to choose the first option. The second option was to simply sneak out of town unnoticed. Let everything continue around the Tyndall family, and one chair at the table is empty. It's an idea, but they won't care. They didn't care about me when I was here. Why did they care about me when I wasn't there? The second option is not for me, but perhaps I could combine the second option with the third. The third option involved my participation in the family of snakes, but not in their favor. Make them regret every deception, lie, theft, and humiliating thing they did to me. Yes, I like door number 3. The only thing holding me back now is that I'm 20 miles from my home, so I need to move on. The bitch's beat-up car was left on the lawn, not in the driveway. My computer and all important documents were packed in boxes and loaded into my Volvo. The clothes I would need in the coming months were also in the car. All the other clothes and items I wanted to keep but didn't need right now were placed in Sam's 2017 Acre. Sam's dog, Bullet, kept pace with me as I tried to escape. She made sounds as if she wanted to go outside. She's always been a pain in the ass, and I'll be glad to not have to pick up her crap and feed and walk a dog that never liked me. Bullet gave me a parting gift by leaving a big fat pile of crap outside the house. On our marital bed lay a blanket that my mother and grandmother had sewn. It was called Wedding Ring because many of the square patches featured wedding rings. The other squares were made from clothes Carol and I wore as children. Our names and wedding date were embroidered on the squares. It was a blanket of memories, the perfect place for shit to take pride of place in this house. The finishing touch was my wedding ring placed on top of the dog shit. No doubt Carol will recognize the symbolism. All the family photos of the cheater and her son Eric were stacked on her cherry dining table. I covered the photos with a towel to protect myself from injury and then took a hammer. I drove the largest nail from my workshop through the entire stack, glass flying in all directions. Now I was ready to move on. Nothing and no one made me feel like I needed to stay here. My loaded Volvo took me to an extended stay hotel on the other side of town. After unloading the car, I drove to the airport, left the Volvo in the long-term parking lot, and rented a car from Hertz. My plan was to prevent the snake family from finding me and bothering me. The rental car took me to my new base of operations. The Uber driver took me to pick up Sam's car so I could put it in storage. When I get settled, I'll unload the car and sell it. It ended up being registered in my name due to Sam not being able to insure it after all his speeding tickets. A dinner of pizza and beer delivered to my room kept me from meeting anyone. I didn't want to go out because I had projects that needed completion. These projects involved moving personal funds so that only I had control over them. Joint credit cards were paid off and closed. I left her an amount equal to her last 2 salaries in the joint account and took the rest. Sam will have to study harder now that I've withdrawn all the money from his college fund that I saved with my monthly contributions. Now he will have to ask his real father for money. Ha! That night, I had a hard time falling asleep and had to adjust my thoughts. I kept looking back at the good times I had with my family and wanted to bring them back. But my mind said that the people I loved did not care about me. Why should I care about them? After this reset, I became less clumsy Joe and more violent Joe. Tomorrow, Violent Joe will appear at Tyndall Manufacturing. It will be Sunday, and there will be no one in the office. Oh, what a fun day I have ahead of me. Funny how it made me sleep better. I parked my rental car a reasonable distance from the front entrance of Tyndall Manufacturing. I could park in my spot, but then someone would realize I was there. After turning off the security alarm and activating it again, I walked into my office. Since I was the CFO, I had access to all of the company's accounts. Tyndall had 7 different accounts, so I transferred all the money into one main account, leaving enough to pay 2 employees' salaries. The line of credit at the bank was maxed out and added to the main account. I transferred all funds to our international account in Cayman. It was still company money. I wasn't going to be charged with any crime other than being a cuckold. This account in Cayman was created many years ago, and we used it as a clearinghouse when buying and selling goods to European companies. Now comes the fun part. I changed the username and password for each account. No one will be able to access the accounts for some time. They won't even know where to start since no banks send paper or electronic statements on a monthly basis. Chuckling, I changed the mailing address to 101 Big Tree Street, 2. Montana 59085. I sent closure letters for electric, gas, water, telephone, and internet. Since the beginning of time, the Tyndall men have always kept every business paper. 5 years ago, I started a program that moved everything to cloud storage. The only papers we had were vehicle titles and warranties. All members of the finance department had access to these files. Only I had the right to add and delete files. Passwords and logins were changed so that no one could even look into the account. All CNC machines that were online received new passwords and logins. Next stop was Eric's office to find something juicy on his computer. It didn't take me long to find some video files. Videos of him sleeping with employees, wives of local people, and of course, Carol. I copied the video to a flash drive and left his computer untouched. I wanted to save this revenge for later. The last stop was in the utility room, but not in an ordinary room, but in a real fortress. The main power line entered this concrete sheltered room. Tyndall Manufacturing consumed a huge amount of electricity when all the machines were running at full capacity. One wrong touch on the wire and a person would be blown to ashes in a nanosecond. Only the electrician and I were allowed to enter this room. It will take several days for the electricity supplier to cut off our service. Meanwhile, I disconnected everything from the control room and added new locks. While they figure out that it was the main transformer block that tripped the breakers, the company will shut off the power. It will take a lot of effort for them to open this massive door. The keys to this room, as well as all other keys to rooms, closets, warehouses, trucks, offices, and machines, were thrown into a bucket of cleaning fluid that would remove any trace of their ownership. It was sad to leave the building where I grew up and wanted to make it my only place of work. I would like to be its president, and Sam would be the next one to lead the company. This was one of my dreams. These dreams turned into nightmares, like most of my other dreams. During my time at Tyndall, I attended most of the industry conferences. I went to meetings and topic groups. Eric took his friends to bars and strip clubs. This was now my new hunting territory to work on. There was no need to open the numerous messages, calls, and emails that my former wonderful family members sent me. It was all the same. We love you. We're sorry you're upset, but we did this for you, not against you. Not to hurt you. Please meet us, or at least your wife, so we can explain everything better. My mother begged Edward to forgive her for getting her pregnant by someone else, and they stayed together. Why can't I do the same with Carol and Sam? The number 17 exploded in my brain. Because Carol had sex with him for 17 years. Your mother was just a one-night stand. On Tuesday morning, I called my attorney Bob Carson to represent me and discuss my options. He had a 3 p.m. window, so I went back to my apartment and collected all the documents I thought he would need. My preferred line of attack was to file for divorce on grounds of infidelity, but to do that I would have to move the bitch to another state. I doubted she would agree. I told him about the consequences of her betrayal and said that I did not want to pay child support. I'm ready for a 50-50 division of property. I have no shares in Tyndall Manufacturing, so this is not a point of contention. I only have a salary and a small income from patents. It's to my advantage that Tyndall Manufacturing underpaid me so much for my work, a salary that I once thought would lead to the presidency and shares in the company. As a school principal, Carol's income was almost equal to mine, so the lawyer thought the divorce would be easy if she didn't object. The plan was to prepare the documents and serve them on her as soon as possible, preferably right at her school. After all, she humiliated me for many years. It's time to share the shame. While in the lawyer's office, I told him about the movement of Tyndall funds. Since I was the CFO, the company authorized me to move money between banks. I haven't taken a penny from the accounts. The money still belonged to the Tyndall company. They just had to work hard to get to them. He felt that my actions were thoughtless. Joe, if this reshuffle, as you call it, results in any financial loss for Tyndall, they could sue you. They can sue and possibly win. And what will they get? What assets do I have to spend huge amounts of money on revenge? Besides, they wouldn't like it if I ended up in court under oath, telling the citizens of our city why I did what I did. No, sir, they won't want this Pandora's box opened for everyone to see. He shook his head and informed me that I needed to pay a fee of $3,000. From my list of manufacturers that I had met and would like to work with, I made 3 appointments pretty quickly. These companies not only wanted my services, but also access to my patents. There was absolutely no reason to stay in this city. I had many friends I could rely on, but I didn't want to burden them. There was only one way to get out of this pile of crap: climb up and jump to a new place, starting over again at 43. A week later, Bob Carson called and said he had just returned from the Dawes office. Edward screamed and demanded my arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny. Bob told the Daw and Edward that all the funds were in a Tyndall account that had been active for many years. All money still belongs to the company. Nothing was filmed. Edward simply needed to arrange for a new signer to be appointed to the account. Of course, I knew that the old bastard would have to fly to the Caymans to do this, and he absolutely hates flying, especially over water. A month after Carol filed for divorce, my lawyer called and asked if I had returned her calls. I laughed out loud at such a stupid question. Of course, I didn't answer her calls, texts, emails, snail mail, or smoke signals. There were 2 legal issues that prevented the divorce from being finalized. Carol objected to me taking Sam's college fund and car. Even my lawyer thought it would be difficult to convince the judge. My answer was, I will give them half of the funds. If this is not enough, I will sue for fraud, as I was misled into thinking I was his father, and I have been paying for all his expenses for the last 16 years. I will file a lawsuit against Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I may not win the case, but the media will have a blast watching the Tyndall family's dirty laundry air on social media. A week later, the lawyer called and said that Carol was willing to sign the papers as they were if I would spend 1 hour with her. She allegedly wanted to justify herself, or perhaps just explain why she did such terrible things. In any case, I didn't want to see her or talk to her again. However, my new clean life required me to get rid of all legal ties to her and anyone whose last name was Tyndale. On the condition that only Carol and I would be present, I agreed. I also wanted the meeting to be videotaped to make sure I wasn't being framed or drugged. It sounds stupid, but after what I ignorantly endured for the last 17 years, I didn't want to take any chances. The next week, at 3 p.m., I backed into my old driveway. Seeing that there were no suspicious cars in which there could be people whom I did not want to see, I approached the front door. She must have been waiting for me because the door opened as if by magic. To her credit, no sexy dress to tempt me. No my favorite dinner in the oven or my special drink on the table. On the table between us lay 2 stacks of documents that would legally destroy our marriage. Romantically, it had long been destroyed. Just like after going to the toilet, the last thing left is paperwork. She offered me a drink, but I sharply refused. I deliberately didn't ask how she was because I didn't care. Why did it have to be? Instead, I said, "Okay, you got me to come. Get started." Over the next 15 minutes, I heard her talk through the cheater's Bible from cover to cover. There was nothing new here. I tried to count the number of "I'm sorry" and "Can we work this out somehow?" But her tirade was too boring for me. She even opened up the story and gave an example of how Edward forgave my mother. I took a marker and wrote in large letters on her envelope. One time is less than 17 years of 24 times a year, which is a total of 408 sex. It wasn't much, Joe. Okay, show me the math. How many times? In a quiet and trembling voice, she whispered, "Too much." There was no anger or rage on my face, just a complete lack of emotion. Seeing my cold interest, she tried to think of something for me. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" Staring straight into her eyes, I asked, "Why?" Taking a deep breath, she began, "You know that I was forced to impregnate Eric for the sake of a child for you. Your father, oh, sorry, Edward, really wanted the Tyndall line to continue in the family. He was concerned that any girl that Eric might get pregnant wouldn't be worthy of the name. Even when I was trying to get pregnant with Sam's baby, I kept making love to you, hoping that you would become a father. I really wanted to have your child and be a family forever, but I ruined everything." The thought of calling her the same frivolous woman Edward so despised was tempting, but I decided to let her stew in her own juices. "I don't agree with your nefarious conclusion, Carol. I've heard this so many times that I'm tired of the idea that Eric's baby will strengthen our family. So, continuing to sleep with Eric after you got pregnant was your way of keeping our family together. Was it so much fun to continue to secretly humiliate me?" "No, Joe, it had nothing to do with you." Damn lie," I shouted. "This had everything to do with me. I was your husband. You promised not to have sex with anyone else, especially my brother. What's wrong with you that you thought sex with someone else was okay? Did you think that if I didn't find out, it wouldn't be a big deal?" "Sorry, Joe, I phrased it wrong. I wanted to say that this was more about me than about you. When I decided to get pregnant with Eric's child, I realized that he was never as good a lover as you. He was rude and demanding. I couldn't wait for him to finally impregnate me. I was happier to stop communicating with this rude man than to even be pregnant. He sweated, he stank, and he made me feel terrible for having to endure it. As soon as I got pregnant, I stopped seeing him. Now all my attention in sex was directed to the man I loved, because he loved me and wanted to please me, which is what you did. After meeting him, I appreciated even more the way you treated me, both in and out of bed. So you came back to him later because I was too good a lover. Nonsense. This may seem terrible. Yeah, this whole Eric thing sounds terrible. Let's quickly finish this pathetic story about how you had to sleep with a big bad man who didn't satisfy you. Please, Joe, I only have an hour left to tell you the rest of my life with you. I still love you, but I know I ruined my chance to be with you. I just want to reassure you that what I did had nothing to do with our relationship. You were a wonderful husband, the best a woman can have. But I have a flaw. I'm very successful in my life, and sometimes it gets to my head. I start to think that I am better, smarter, and smarter than my peers. I lose compassion for others and act like an arrogant bitch. And you know it's true. I needed a man who would treat me cruelly, and Eric fit that mold. Joe, this deficiency became apparent after your mother and father convinced me to get pregnant with Eric instead of you. You mean when you were used as breeding stock? I intervened. I suppose there was something like that because there was no expression of love. We undress, have sex, and I leave. No hugs or kisses after sex. No schedule for the next meeting. I only contacted him when I needed rough, wild sex, and only then. Sometimes it was twice a month, sometimes 3 months passed between meetings. Eric didn't care how often I came to his house. Long story short, Joe, I started having sex with Eric again because I needed to humiliate myself to lower my arrogance and not be so smug. Rough sex was what I needed, not because you were a bad lover, but because I had a need that I couldn't control. And besides, I was ashamed for you to treat me the way I wanted from Eric. You have always been a very gentle and loving person, always treating me like a queen. I used him instead of a therapist to deal with my feelings of superiority. Now, looking back, I understand that I made a big mistake, and I am sorry that I offended the best person in my life. One day, when all this is behind us, I hope you will remember the times when we were happy together. This is a pretty far-reaching story. At least I know most of the facts now, or not. Quietly, she said, "Yes, now you know all the facts." Is it true? Let's find out what I don't know yet. When was the last time he had you? The last time I was with him was when I kicked his kidneys after the terrible scene at your parents' house. Did you please him every time? She nodded. And you always swallowed everything? Another nod. I'm guessing he didn't use a condom. She shook her head. Have we ever made love on the same day you slept with Eric? Her face turned pale at this question. I always douched at his place and then again at home. This does not answer my question. How many times, Carol? Not often, Joe, but there were times when you really wanted to make love, and I couldn't refuse you. On days like these, I said that I'd rather just give you pleasure. I barely made it to the door, leaving a trail of pieces of undigested lunch behind me. Carol's sobs burned my ears. I think she didn't like that there was vomit on her carpet and dress. Well, that's what she needs. My lawyer had to reprint the documents because no one in court wanted to touch them. 2 weeks later, the divorce was signed, and I kept half of the college fund and the proceeds from the sale of the car. She got the house until that bastard Sam graduated from high school. I'm sure he was furious. But since he no longer wanted to see me in his life, then I and all my money left too. Since I was not his father, I refused to pay child support. If necessary, I will file a suit for treason and sue all the Tyndalls for fraud. Nobody wanted this shame. I myself was already ashamed to be Tyndall. During my self-imposed confinement, I was hesitant to view the video files I had downloaded from Eric's office. I'm still reeling from Carol's betrayal, let alone being prepared to watch two people I hate have sex. Each file had a different name, and I felt uneasy when I saw the name Sindra on one of them. Sindra is the name of my best friend John Brown's wife. John was 2 years older than me at school, but we had little contact because he was a big athlete and I was a nerd. But this nerd was chosen to help the athlete pass a required English course. He was great at math and science, but was stumped at English. We became friends over the course of the semester until he left for a small college on a football scholarship. After graduating from college, he returned to our city to be closer to his elderly parents. He came to me for help in finding a job, and I was glad to see that his background in mathematics and engineering would be suitable for our workshop. On my recommendation, he was hired, and our friendship was renewed. A couple of years ago, John and Sindra were having serious relationship problems. As far as I understand, Sindra was at a bachelorette party and was either poisoned or had too much to drink. Anyway, she slept with some guy and she was embarrassed, so she told John as soon as she got home. But by then, the damage had already been done. They already had 2 young sons, and divorce would have been a disaster. The file named Sindra was the smallest and began with her staggering into a hotel room. It was clear that the camera on the dresser had been left on. She walked like a zombie and stared at the large double bed. Eric entered the frame and began to undress the stupefied Sindra. I thought there was no sound, but I realized that no one was talking. I was impressed by Sindra's figure in a tiny bikini on the lake, but when she stood there naked, it took my breath away. Now I understood why John didn't want to lose her. Eric made her sit on the bed. With one hand, he pulled her face towards him. No tenderness, no love, just raw animal passion. Having finished his pleasures, he took a drink from the minibar and lit a cigarette. Sindra walked slowly, as if in a dream, into the bathroom, cleaned herself up, got dressed, and left. During this entire scene, not a single word was spoken. John always wanted to know what happened, and now I had proof in case he wanted revenge. I invited John to my home for a private conversation. After a couple of beers, he asked what top-secret information I had for him. John, unexpectedly for me, I found a video of your wife having sex with another man. It seems to me that she was either poisoned or drunk. I can either tell you who it is or show you the video or both. Which option will hurt you the least? It took some time before the big man could compose himself. Tears appeared in his eyes and his breathing became heavy. I put my hand on his shoulder but didn't say anything. "Who is this?" he finally said. "This is my brother Eric." "But she can't stand him. Consider him a real goat. Why would she sleep with Eric? Like I said, John, she looked like she was out of her mind. I will show you the video to prove that she did not initiate this affair." After watching the video, he recognized the same stranger that Sindra had slept with after her bachelorette party a few years ago. She didn't know his name and didn't even understand why they had sex. She sobbed inconsolably as she told this story to John. Trying to speak calmly, he asked, "Why did he have an employee's wife like that?" She said it was a one-time thing and he never contacted her again. "My guess, John, is that he didn't know her last name. He just pumped up the most beautiful woman and took her. He didn't need her name, just her body." When he stood up, he said, "Thank you, Joe. Oddly enough, this is actually useful. I'm glad I forgave her then because she was so upset and sorry. Now I know the facts, but I'm not sure if I'll share them with Sindra yet. I'll have to decide as I go along. Can I have this video, Joe?" "Certainly. I think this is the only copy. Would you mind if your brother suddenly became a victim of several accidents in the coming months? I will be glad. It will be to my advantage. Just let me know the time so I can have an alibi." "Thank you, Joe. You're like a brother to me." "Yes, and you are much better than the brother they forced on me." We hugged, and he said over his shoulder to me, "Stay in touch." I didn't spend a lot of time watching Carol and Eric's videos. It just wasn't worth it. This only aggravated my condition. The moment came when I decided to destroy all videos with Carol's name. I did not want to see these 2 scoundrels again. But just when I was about to delete the files, fate intervened, and instead of clicking delete, I clicked play. It was more disgusting than I could have imagined. The woman of my dreams and the love of my life to humiliate myself in this way was devastating. That scene erased all the good thoughts I ever had about her. John came back a couple of weeks later to thank me for helping me answer questions that had been bothering him for years. He had the idea of using the remaining recordings to expose unfaithful wives and help husbands whom Eric had betrayed. I gladly gave him the remaining disgusting videos. My search for a new job yielded good results. One of Tyndall's main competitors contacted me and asked me to come to a nearby town for an interview. It was the first flash of joy in a long time. Of course, I immediately agreed to whatever date and time suited them. Donen Corporation was led by CEO and President Tim Donen. My meeting with Tim went very well, and I was offered a very competitive package commensurate with the level of my colleagues. There was one caveat. I had to meet with the head of Reynolds Resources for a personality assessment. Considering what I've been through in recent months, I was worried that they might find some problems in my head. The man I was supposed to meet the next morning at 10 o'clock was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner of the company. Reynolds Resources handled not only the personality assessment, but also all HR, recruiting, corporate governance, and reporting responsibilities for Donen Manufacturing Company. Tim said this took a lot of pressure off him, as he was a true engineer, a man who loved projects more than paperwork. Their office was very modern and stylish. It was a change from just the Donen manufacturing office. After the pretty secretary took my name, I was offered coffee and asked to sit on the couch while Mickey D was ready to receive me. To my surprise, Mickey D turned out not to be Mr., but an attractive woman, probably in her early 30s. She didn't seem surprised when I fumbled for words when we shook hands. It was a firm but feminine squeeze that I found very pleasant. We spent the next couple of hours discussing my personality traits, preferences, and philosophy in engineering. Our conversations were polite and very pleasant. Tactfully, she broached the topic of why I was leaving the Tyndall family business. She knew that she was not allowed to ask too personal questions, but left me the opportunity to say what I myself saw fit. I just told her that I had been passed over for a promotion to president of the company and that I was being paid less than I deserved. "Oh my God, Joe, it's 11:45 am, and I'm sure you want to have lunch. I will send my report to Tim, and he will contact you to clarify the details. Would it be against company rules if I asked you to have lunch together? Well, what should I call it? Give a tour of the city for a new employee." She gave me a sly smile and said, "I will gladly accept this offer." Thus began our first lunches, which grew into dinners and more over the next few months. I was in no rush to get into a relationship, but I really enjoyed spending time with her. Judging by her reaction, she also enjoyed our slow rapprochement and development of friendship. Meanwhile, Tyndall Manufacturing Company was experiencing financial difficulties. Although the company had the money to pay all the bills, it simply wasn't available. Edward had to act quickly because suppliers and contractors needed to be paid. He had to use his emergency asset to keep the company afloat. A 160-acre plot of land just outside the city that provided a prime location for development was worth millions. However, the thought of mortgaging this land terrified all members of the Tyndall family, whose cold bones had lain buried in the ground for over a century. The proceeds from the mortgage kept the company afloat until Edward went to the Caymans to regain control of the money. But the damage to reputation was serious. Instead of allowing Tyndall Manufacturing to pay for materials within 14 days, suppliers demanded cash up front. This severely damaged their working capital, and the mortgage was not repaid even after the money from the Caymans returned back to the country. Gradually, the details of the explosion in my personal and business life became known to Mickey D. She understood this because her world had also been shattered when her husband was hit by a UPS truck 2 years ago. He was the founder and mastermind behind Reynolds Resources. She worked with him and kept the business afloat after his death. Meanwhile, John told me that someone attacked Eric in the dark parking lot of the bar. After being hit several times with a steel pipe, Eric begged for mercy. "My work at Donen has brought me great joy in my life. I settled in, and since I didn't have a non-compete agreement with Tyndall, I started poaching my best clients. They knew I had left the company and were happy to accept my contact information. I wasn't as good a salesman as Eric, but I knew what they needed and how to make it better, faster, and cheaper than Tyndall. All Eric knew about our products was that you had to pay for them. Eric didn't go out to meet clients very often. He seemed to continue to get injured leaving bars. 6 months later, the relationship with Mickey D was great. In addition to being beautiful, smart, caring, and loving, she was also fun to be around. After many dates and growing closer, our evenings became more physical. Not a fight, of course, but a lot of touching, hugging, and kissing. One evening it became clear that Mickey was interested in herself and was ready to spend the night with me. After dancing more closely, she felt signs of my desire. Her leg rubbed between mine, and she looked up at me with her beautiful eyes and whispered, "Can we get out of here?" Absolutely. Then I kissed her with more passion than before. We couldn't keep our hands off each other on the way home. It was almost dangerous. But when endorphins hit your head, it's impossible to stop. There was no struggling over buttons or ripping of shirts as we slowly undressed each other in her bedroom. Our hands found their place in unfamiliar territories. Our breathing and pulse quickened. And then, "Did you take protection?" she whispered in my ear. "No, I'm sterile. That's why Carol had Eric's baby." "What did the doctor tell you about your infertility?" "No, doctor. My mother said I had mumps as a child, and that's why I couldn't have children." "No, doctor. The same mother who lied to you about your real father and convinced your wife to sleep with your brother. If I were you, I wouldn't believe a word she said and would contact my doctor. After we have used up all our sexual energy, the topic of my fertility, I promised to go to a fertility specialist and get tested. Because Mickey was interested in this topic, I asked her to attend the next physician conference. It didn't take long for the doctor to tell me I wasn't infertile. He said that if we don't desperately want to have a baby right now, he would recommend living without worrying about pregnancy. Perhaps taking some vitamins and avoiding excessive alcohol consumption will help a little. The best way to get pregnant is to not try too hard to get pregnant. That's what he recommended. Your chances are slim, but not impossible. Mickey D started taking birth control again, and I wore a condom for a couple of months. We thought it was time to find a place together. Since Christmas was approaching, we had to wait until New Year's. But first she wanted me to meet her parents. She told them she was dating a great guy, and they wanted him to come over to their house. Perhaps this will be the beginning of me having a real family again. I was a little nervous as we pulled up to the large but modest house. As soon as the door opened, Mickey D stood in front of me and grabbed a man wearing gray pants and a red Christmas sweater. She made a quarter turn to the right and said, "Dad, I want you to meet the man I love, Joe Tyndall. Joe, meet my father." There I interrupted her by saying, "Mr. Donan, oops, Tim. I didn't know she was your daughter." Wow, I don't know what to say. Say, "Good to see you, Tim," and come inside. "Why didn't you tell me Tim was your father? Don't you think this might interest me?" "Yes, Joe, and that's why we didn't want you to know. I wanted to know if you were interested in me or my inheritance, the boss's daughter and sole heir to the company." Like me, she had a younger brother, but he died when he was only 16 years old. "So, what does it mean to me that I was invited to Christmas dinner with your mother and father? Is it personal? Is it business? And does it affect our relationship?" "Joe, this means I love you and I want you to meet my family. This is a separate business. Since you told me that you have no family, I ask you to spend Christmas with my family." "Okay, now I know that Mickey D is Donan. I really have no idea, do I?" She giggled and said, "Maybe you should add a D to your name instead of yes." At this point, all four of us laughed. When the air cleared, we had a wonderful afternoon and evening. I really enjoyed being with Tim and Micah's mother, Barbara. I may not know anything, but I was under the impression that my request for Micah's marriage would be accepted by her parents. I'm pretty sure Mickey would have said yes, but given what happened to me, I hate taking anything for granted. My instinct was correct. Mickey jumped off the couch onto me, and I got down on one knee with the blue velvet box in my hand. She moved her lips away from my face just enough to say, "Yes, yes, yes." 3 months later, we had a small wedding with no one on my side of the church except John, Sindra, and a few new friends I had made. After our honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment and began our life together. The first thing Mickey did was stop taking birth control pills. We went to the county court asking for a name change. Mickey D. Reynolds changed her maiden name back to Mickey Donan. With society's more lenient attitude towards gender identity, marital status, and personal names, I changed my name to Joseph Timothy Donan. When we asked his permission, Tim was both flattered and delighted that I had taken the name Donan. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you, son." My friend John found a file of Carol fucking Eric, and he had a desire to take revenge for both him and me. John's son Tyler was the same age as the boys at Carol's school and played sports with them. Tyler provided John with text addresses for several younger and older boys. Using a new address, John sent a copy of Carol and Eric's sex to each of these guys. A week later, Carol was walking down the hallway between classes when she heard someone barking sharply. It seemed strange to her. Turning toward the sound, she saw a small group of older boys grinning at her. At first, she thought that a button on her blouse was undone or that her skirt was riding up her thigh. When she turned around, she was startled by the buck, bark, bark coming from another group of boys. Remembering that the school's mascot was a bulldog, she thought there would be some pre-game team building that Friday night. As soon as she entered the office, the barking stopped. She didn't hear the barking repeat for the next 2 hours, but when she left the office, the barking started again. From one end of the hall to the other, it sounded like she had just walked into a dog kennel during feeding time. There was an occasional howl, but mostly bark, bark, bark that sounded everywhere she went. None of the other employees experienced this phenomenon. The next morning, as soon as she stepped into the concrete parking lot, the sound resembled the starting line of the Alaskan Iditarod sled dog race. All mouths were now turned towards her, just like she had the 50-speaker surround sound turned up at full blast. She burst into the building, looking ahead at the concrete rather than the dog impersonators. She breathed a sigh of relief when the door closed behind her. As she walked to her office, a lone man shouted, "Bark like a dog, bitch, barks like a dog." The deep voice sounded like Eric's, but what was he doing here? Why would he say this phrase? As if a ton of bricks had fallen on her head, she realized what had happened. The boys had a copy of one of the videos where Eric had sex with her. She dodged the question, "How did the video come about?" right up to, "Oh shit, what will I do? My job, my career, my dignity, all this will be destroyed." She quickly ran into her office and slammed the door. Are employees grinning? Do they know what happened? Who saw the video? What should I do now? She thought. An hour and a half later, when the corridors were empty for class, she rushed out of the office. Throwing over her shoulder that she felt bad and was going home, she left. And she definitely didn't lie. She really felt bad. But she didn't go home, she rushed at full speed to the Tyndall manufacturing office. Bursting into Eric's office, she hissed, "Did you send out a video of us having sex? If so, I will kill you." Eric felt the heat of her rage. Stuttering quickly, he replied, "No, I kept them all here. I'm the only one who saw them," patting his computer and opening the file. "You stupid idiot. You've been hacked. They went online and I was destroyed. Can this life get any worse?" With sobs and groans, she collapsed on the floor. Not knowing what to do, Eric ran to his father's office, and they both rushed back to the sobbing Carol. These two great minds decided to take her home, close the door, and get back to work. 5 years later, Carol had to resign as school principal because she had lost the respect of teachers, students, and the school board. A special position was created for her because she was an expert in her field. Her new job was in an office located in an unfinished basement, where she reviewed all the new state and national procedures and regulations. She had very little personal contact with other staff, and none at all with students. With dirty, unwashed hair, flannel pajama pants, and fluffy slippers, she arrived at work at 6 in the morning and left an hour before school ended. Her notoriety forced her to live as a social outcast. She went to another city to buy groceries. Sam was often sent home for fighting. At first, several men became interested in her and sent her dog treats with phone numbers attached, hoping for a response. Tyndall Manufacturing's financial situation deteriorated sharply after I left. The loss of customers to Donen Manufacturing, rising CFO and coup costs, and poor management by Eric led the company to economic collapse. To pay off his mortgage and other debts, Edward had to sell his family's 160-acre farm. The land will be developed for mid-priced houses, taking advantage of the beautiful hilly terrain. A business broker found a buyer for the company, and Edward pulled the trigger that destroyed the family business. Edward and Sally rented a small apartment, which took up most of their pension. When Edward and Sally die, the only evidence of the Tyndall family's existence in this city will be the tombstones. Eric and Sam left town and began new careers as a used car salesman and burger joint salesman. On the 1st of July, the buyer of the company called a meeting of all employees to introduce the new president, and Edward and Eric were not allowed to attend. The new site foreman, John Brown, attracted the attention of curious people and loudly announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to our new president, Mr. Joe Donen." Employees were relieved to learn that the company had been sold to a competitor rather than to a huge conglomerate that would have sold off the equipment and fired everyone. The real surprise came when I left the office. People began talking and looking around. Many recognized me, although under a new name. "Hi all. Glad to be back in this building. Did you miss me?" This was met with a loud burst of applause. It seems Eric wasn't as good a president as he thought he was. After convincing Donen Manufacturing employees that the acquisition would be beneficial and bring growth, the crowd began chanting, "Donen, Donen, Donen." Of course, the name on the building and on your paychecks will now be Donen Manufacturing. Even more applause. Thank you for such a wonderful welcome. I'm sure it will be a wonderful change for all of us. Now let me introduce you to my family, my wife Mickey D, and our son Timothy Joseph Donen. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next